Hello, welcome to Picture Me Coding with Eric Aker and Mike Mull. Hi, Mike.
Hey there.
Mike, you told me that Jeff Tweedy has a new album out. Jeff Tweedy, the singer from Wilco, and it's got like 50 songs or something. I don't know how many songs there are on it. It's very long, but I just can't stop listening to it.
It is very long, yes. I think it's divided up into discs or something like that.
What's a disc?
Although, I don't know. I think it's like one of those Frisbee things you throw around.
I like some of the stuff on it more than I feel like I should. It feels like too long, but I don't know what I would cut. There's this song on there called Feel Free, which is very simple. And I just love this song. And I feel like loving, like I helplessly love it. And I always feel like I shouldn't really like this song that much. It's like a long, I love it, but it's over long and it's repetitive. And at the end, he says, sing a song with your friends that never ends. And then ironically, it ends right there.
I like the album too. It's a little bit more folky maybe than what he was doing with Wilco.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, I like folky. So
I know. I feel like I'm a sucker for this stuff. Am I a sucker, Mike, for this stuff?
Yeah, you like what you like.
What about you? You got something?
I do. I have a disclaimer for this one first. That's not a important disclaimer, but the disclaimer is that I happen to know somebody who is in this band that I'm going to recommend an album of. So
that's like in papers where they have to state their financial interest.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not getting any sort of kickback here though, so I suspect there's probably a little bit of bias based on the fact that I know somebody in this band. But nonetheless, I really like this album. I think it's my favorite metal album of the year.
Wow.
And probably my favorite since the Blood Incantation album from last year. But anyway, the band is called Agriculture, and the album is called The Spiritual Sound. The vocalist was in a band with one of my sons through junior high and high school. So it's kind of black metal. The band describes themselves as ecstatic black metal, which
happy black metal.
Yeah,
happy black metal Wednesday to you, Mike.
Slightly uplifting black metal. One's personal preference regarding this album may correlate to one's tolerance for black metal extreme lyrics, because there is some of that. It's not quite as extreme as some other black metal that you are probably familiar with if you have listened to black metal. And there are songs on here which are, I guess you would say, normal vocals. So there's even a love song. So
wow. So give it a try. You might not hate it. That's your recommendation here.
If you're a metal fan, I think you will like it.
Okay.
If you are not a metal fan, it may take a little while for you to grow on you. But in any case, it is a good album. And I also want to stress that this is not just my opinion. This is not some band that only I know about that has 3 listeners on Spotify. They've been reviewed pretty well, and they're playing festivals and stuff like that. So,
oh wow, you're saying they're objectively good. I like that. I like art that's objectively good.
I'm saying that other people besides me like them. So.
Oh, okay. That's my definition of objective for the day. Okay. You brought a paper to me and you said, I want to talk about this paper. And I saw the name of the author on the paper and was immediately like, oh, I'm a little intimidated, but okay, I'll give it a shot. Can you tell us what you want to talk about?
Do you think anybody's heard of this guy?
I bet they have.
So the inspiration for this was twofold. One is that it's the 75th anniversary of what is now called the Turing Test. And so the paper that we're going to talk about was written by a guy named Alan Turing, who you might have heard of.
Yeah, he was in a movie.
Yeah, they made a movie about him.
I guess he wasn't in the movie, but I mean, it looked just like him, I think.
Yeah. What's his name? Cumberbatch.
Wait, so, okay. Yeah. What's the name of the paper, the Turing paper, where he talked about the Turing test? What's the name of the paper?
So it's not called the Turing test. surprisingly enough.
Can you imagine writing a paper? The Mike and Eric test.
The paper itself is known as Computing Machinery and Intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts off with the somewhat daunting question. I propose to consider the question, can machines think?
Can machines think? And he calls the Turing test throughout the paper, he calls it the imitation game, which is quite a nice name for it. And that was actually the name of the film they made about his life. So
Correct.
when I think of the Turing test, Mike, I usually think a human is typing stuff into a terminal and they don't know if the answers they're getting in that terminal are from a computer program or another human.
That's the way I have often heard it stated. Another variant, which I have often heard stated, is you have two terminals that you're talking to, and you're trying to determine which one is the human and which one is the computer.
Like I'm in a chair that
And
swivels and I face north and then I swivel around and face it. Like it has to be like, that's the setup.
yeah, big circular desk.
Okay.
Yeah, the logistics of it, you have to imagine yourself. But the reason why I thought this would be interesting to discuss is two reasons. One is I'd never actually seen Alan Turing's statement of what we now call the Turing test, what he called the imitation game.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was probably a good idea to get the specifics of that. And then the other reason is that because of the era we live in, people are now claiming, with some justification, that machines have passed the Turing test. And so we want to kind of see if what they are passing is what he actually proposed they would need to pass.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole subreddit, My AI Boyfriend. That's probably about the same level as the Turing test, I would bet.
We shall see. I don't have an AI boyfriend.
So
I can't comment.
Can you give a short description of how he sets it up in the paper? I was surprised to read his setup too, actually.
Yeah, let me just see if I can read exactly what he says. It is played with three people, a man, A, a woman, B, and an interrogator, C, who may be of either sex. The interrogator stays in a room apart from the other two. The object of the game for the interrogator is to determine which of the other two is the man and which is the woman. So that's the basic statement of how he proposes the imitation game.
It's weird he starts with a man and a woman too. It's like you wouldn't have it. That didn't even occur to me that would be like. I mean, I don't think we need to phrase it that way now.
Yeah, I've never heard anybody state it specifically this way, that he's trying to determine which is the man and which is the woman.
But the thing that surprised me from the first section where he sets us up is he says, okay, you've got A, B, and C. And he says A plays to deceive, B plays to assist, and answers are typewritten from separate rooms. So one person that the interrogator is talking to is trying to trick the interrogator. The other person's trying to help the interrogator. That's his setup. Do I have that right?
I think that's right. Yeah. And I think the separate rooms thing is mostly just a detail of the experimental design, to keep him from getting subtle clues from the environment. But I think the thing about the way he sets this up that is different than what I had heard before, and which seems significant to me, is that there is, one of the agents involved in this is specifically trying to deceive you.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't anticipate that. And he says, what if the deceiver, A, is actually, what if we slot a computer program in that place? So his test is, can I write a program that would trick a human into thinking that we're talking to a human? It's purposely deceiving. That's the goal.
Yeah, and this kind of answers a question for me that I've had about the statement of the Turing test that I've heard in the past, which is, if I were given the task of trying to determine which one is human and which one is the machine, probably the first thing that would occur to me is to ask, something that I don't think a human could answer easily.
Yeah.
So,
What's the
for
flow rate
example,
of sand in a 4 million gallon container with a hole at the bottom, like crap like that?
yeah. So one that I tried with Gemini in particular was, what's the first prime number larger than 2 billion?
Oh, that's
And
easy, Mike. Everybody knows that.
my expectation is that a human could answer that, but that it would take them some time and they would have to know a couple of things.
Mm-hmm.
But it took Gemini 3 or 4 seconds, and it got the correct answer. So anyway, I believe the way that he states it, that sort of question is not really relevant, because one of the agents that is the computer, could easily assume, if asked that question, that it could just say, I don't know, or that's too
Yeah.
hard for me to figure out, or whatever, because it is allowed to try to deceive you and try to convince you that it's a human.
The goal is deception. So
Yeah.
whatever the I mean, if you're using an LLM, what's the prompt you give it to make sure that it can deceive, to model what a human would say? Can it pass that test? And I'm already like, sure, it could pass that test. Who's the interrogator, though? Do we need some sort of savvy wit, or is it just average person interrogator? That's one of the questions that I had reading this. Do you need to have like qualified interrogators, like Olympic level judges of the Turing test?
I don't know if he ever, I don't believe he ever says anything specific about the interrogator other than they are human.
Well, and there are papers about seeing if you can get programs to pass this. People have tried all the way back into the 60s, right, with Eliza. But there was a paper you sent me from two authors here at UCSD and Cog Sci department, Jones and Bergen. They have a paper called Large Language Models Pass the Turing Test. And it was an interesting paper, but I was kind of unsurprised, I guess. Um, they write something that I found really interesting. They say, at its core, the Turing test is a measure of substitutability, whether a system can stand in for a real person without an interlocutor noticing the difference. Machines that can imitate people's conversations so well as to replace them could automate jobs and disrupt society by replacing the social and economic functions of real people. More narrowly, the Turing test is an exacting measure of a model's ability to deceive people, to bring them to have a false belief that the model is a real person. So I got to tell you, I read that and I read Turing's description, and right away, I think to myself, yeah, LLMs could probably fool a lot of people.
I tried some experiments myself. So there's a part later in Turing's paper where he talks about the setup where you just have one chatbot, or you have one witness, and you are trying to determine if it is human or computer. And he calls
Mm-hmm.
this viva voce.
It's kind of easy
He
mode for this test. It's like light mode.
right. So he has some questions that he asks, and they're about Shakespeare sonnets,
Mm-hmm.
and there's one in particular about there's this famous sonnet, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?"
Mm-hmm.
And he asks the agent, why not a spring's day? And the answer that Turing anticipates is, well, because that doesn't scan. It's not iambic pentameter or whatever. I tried to put these questions to Gemini and Chat GPT, and
Mm-hmm.
both of them, without any sort of, if you don't give them some sort of context for it, they basically lecture. They give you this
Oh,
very
yeah.
long
Yeah.
exposition about why that doesn't work as a metaphor, and blah blah blah. And they might
Mm-hmm.
actually get the part about it doesn't scan, but it doesn't sound conversational at all.
Mm-hmm.
And they mention in this paper as well that they actually do two sets of tests. One where they just give the context to the LLM, hey, you're participating in a Turing test, and that's about
Mm-hmm.
all they tell it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another set where they give it a more descriptive persona to try to tell it more about what it is trying to do with
Mm-hmm.
respect to the interrogator.
Mm-hmm. The Jones and Berger paper is interesting. They say that the three party test is actually harder than having someone chat directly with a computer. Um, because with like you get this comparison, but you're sort of, when it's just you talking to the machine, you're comparing to like what you expect human behavior to be like. But I thought as I was reading the setup that it seems worth it to mention that this is a game, the imitation game. It's a game in language, and that allows us to kind of level the playing field for programs which can receive language and emit language. You can't be like, who's better at building a house, my program or this construction crew? So it's like, this is a game in language. Now, the thing that I was maybe almost, I don't know, not irritated by, but just kind of like a little rock in the shoe, pebble in the shoe when I was reading this paper is Turing starts with the sentence, can machines think? But then he just like savages that question as he moves further and further into the paper. He's like, people will say machines don't think like people, but if a machine can deceive well enough, we don't even care about that question anymore. It doesn't matter to us. He states his own belief really plainly. And he's like, I think computers will exist and programs will exist that will pass this game in the future. And so he's like, are there imaginable computers which can pass the game? And that gets him to what he says is like, he wants to find the best question. And he ultimately says, I think the original question, can machines think, is too meaningless to deserve discussion. And I was like, well, why the hell did you start this paper with the question that's too meaningless to deserve discussion? He really wants to say, instead of that question, are there imaginable computers and programs which will be able to pass this test someday? And so, can you write a program on a sufficiently powerful computer that can deceive a human? And he says, I think so, yes. And he says this is a much more interesting question than can machines think?
I suppose he was trying to be provocative with the original question, which is short and sweet. But yeah, he modifies it considerably throughout the paper. At one point, he even says, are there discrete state machines which would do well on this test? So, he's boiling it down to not just machines, but discrete state machines.
Mechanistic, deterministic, state A to state B to state C. That was interesting. And it was kind of almost controversial. As I was reading his paper, though, because of the way he's like refining his terms. Can machines think? Let's talk about what it means to talk about machines. Let's replace our question. It reads to me like a philosophy paper, not a computer science paper. Is that a kooky response to it? What do you think?
I think that's a good take because if you look at a lot of the responses by other people to his conclusions, they also, go into the realm of logic and philosophy. So I think other people probably viewed this as being something more of, at the time at least, more of a philosophical argument than something about computation specifically.
Well, and he's saying, I believe. He says that a few times in the paper. I believe at some point computers will exist that can do this. And like you mentioned with the discrete state machine thing, he's talking about like a computer is fundamentally a mechanical computing device. And so he's pretty much saying, and maybe this is a hot take, someday you'll have a giant mechanical computer, like the domino half adder. You could put questions into it and it will pass for a human playing the imitation game. That stated in that way, it sounds like a pretty weird idea.
I think he wants to make a distinction. Well, he explicitly says at one point in the paper that you shouldn't put too much emphasis on the fact that these computers use electricity and that human nerves also seem to use electricity. That may be just a coincidence, and it's really, you could extend these ideas to purely mechanical computers, even though, we may not be able to envision a mechanical computer which is fast enough and has adequate storage to actually simulate a human.
There's some surprising stuff in here. His belief that eventually there will be a computer that can do this is a surprising statement of belief. He talks later in the paper about arguments against these views. Here's the most stunning line for me in the paper. I want to talk about the contrary views and how he sums it up, and then we can talk about recent attempts to pass the test. But this to me was the most stunning line. This is 1950. He writes this. This is like the nine pages in. Nevertheless, Turing writes, I believe that at the end of the century, the use of words and general educated opinion will have altered so much that one will be able to speak of machines thinking without expecting to be contradicted. I was like, whoa, that is quite a statement right there. Quite a statement of belief. In 1950, I was sort of shocked by that.
Yeah, I think that was a pretty surprising guess because he was not prone really to flights of fancy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was the fact that he legitimately thought that computers would reach that point by the end of the century is pretty surprising.
It's a pretty visionary statement, like shockingly visionary statement. And okay, so let's look at two aspects of it. One, I think he's right that in 2025, the use of words and general educated opinion have altered so much that people talk about machines thinking, right? Would you agree with that? People say, oh, I fed this prompt into the AI and it thought about it and they gave me this answer. Or it came to the wrong conclusion, or it was incorrect, or it assumed things. There's all kinds of words people use about these programs that imbue the program with a kind of independent ability to think, just implying there's a thinking happening. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. It's obviously not universal. There's still a lot of people in the stochastic parrot camp. So it's, I think, the idea that we have reasoning machines which are approaching AGI is controversial still. But yeah, casually people do talk about them reasoning and thinking and making conclusions.
But it didn't quite happen by the end of the century, right? I mean, in the 90s, did people say this?
I think you'd have to, like, for instance, there was Eliza. There were, people who argued that Eliza was intelligent in a sense. And I think
Wait, describe Eliza for people who don't know about it.
So Eliza was a relatively simple chatbot that would respond to people's questions, and it would kind of was meant to sort of simulate a therapist, I think. And there were actually, apparently, this was, I think, in the 1960s was when
60s.
Eliza was written, and there were people apparently who actually took it for being a human being on the other side of the line.
They have to be in the minority, though, because it's so annoying. All it does is like pull noun phrases out of sentences you give it. So you could say, Eliza, it's raining today. And it would say, I could see that you're feeling sad about the weather. Something like, I can see that blah about noun phrase included in your statement. And there's no way the majority of people are going to take that as a real person.
At least given sufficient time, I think anybody would conclude pretty quickly that it was not human because it's so repetitive and it has to eventually start asking the same questions. But
so that thing probably is not a good way of passing the Turing test. But by the 90s,
so if you look at things like Deep Blue, for instance, I can't remember when the
2011
Kasparov
on Jeopardy. Oh, Kasparov was earlier, right?
Yeah, the chess thing. Like if you had asked if somebody had written a computer program in the 1950s when Turing was talking about these things that could beat any chess player in the world, if you'd asked people, is that computer thinking? I think at that time, a lot of people would have said yes. That is a type of cognition, and so this computer is thinking. But
wow.
I don't think people. I don't think people thought it was human-like intelligence until probably, I don't know, 2020.
Yeah, LLMs. The chess analogy is tougher for me because chess seems mathematical, deterministic, state machine-ish, right? Like it doesn't seem like it seems more programmatic, like amenable to programming. Sure, the state space is absolutely massive, but it's different from I typed in a sentence and I got back a sentence and I wasn't sure if it was a person or a program on the other end.
I would concur with that. I just think the goalposts have moved a little bit in terms of what people think of thinking in machines.
Okay, all right, all right. Well, so Turing, visionary in that line, but maybe he was 25 years too early, or 20 years too early. By the end of the century, it really took about 2019, and then suddenly people are like, "Yes, I will have this program be my girlfriend. Yes, I would like to get married to the program." Okay, so these are the objections that he raises in the paper, and some of these I don't think we really need to go into. And I'm almost like, what? Can we just skip that one? So he says, here are some objections. There's a theological objection. There's a head in the sand objection. I don't think I would have really raised that one. There's a mathematical objection. I find that one interesting. He says there's an argument from consciousness. We'll talk about some of these. There's arguments from various disabilities, which is like, well, the computer can't do A, X, or Y. He talks about Ada Lovelace. And then the last couple are, he says, well, humans are informal. So this is the argument from the informality of behavior. Computers are rigid. Computer programs are rigid. And he talks about ESP and telepathy. And I was like, okay, let's put the telepathy, let's put the theological, let's put the head in the sand. We'll put those in a bucket. And you and I, Mike, we're programmers. So we'll focus on math and consciousness.
I'm cool with that.
So on the mathematical objection, he raises Gödel's impossibility result. He says, you know, the trick is that people might say, well, you can't. There are certain things that will be impossible to encode in the program, and that's a result that comes out of Gödel. But people give wrong answers too. And you can employ that as a kind of trick for the computer. When we know a computer's answer to a question is wrong, he writes, and this one struck me a little bit because I feel this almost every day when the LLM gets crap wrong. He says, it gives us a feeling of superiority. But when we're superior, we're not superior over all machines, just that one. They're just going to get better and better, Mike. This is a scalable problem. That's kind of what he's saying. And the mathematical objection. What do you think about that objection? He's channeling Sam Altman there. They're just getting better and better.
I don't know if he was raising the objection because he wanted to refute it or because he thought it was a real thing to worry about. I guess my take is that I ultimately believe that human brains are, in some sense of the word, machines. And so I do not currently believe that there's something that the human brain can do that a machine can't do at some point in time. So if the incompleteness theorem or something places a restriction on computers, I think it probably also applies to human beings.
Yeah,
but there are a lot of people who have, contrary opinions. I haven't read the book for a long time, but I know, in The Emperor's New Mind, Roger Penrose's book, he does argue that probably human brains are doing something different than what, a universal Turing machine is doing.
Well, he raises most of his objections so he can kind of like wipe them away. The only one he seems to entertain seriously is the Ada Lovelace one. The consciousness one, he gives short shrift to. He's like, people would object that a computer can't intend, a computer program. It can't have meaning. He says this argument appears to be a denial of the validity of our test. And he's saying, I don't care about that. I care about whether or not a human can be deceived. He says, according to the most extreme form of this consciousness critique, the only way by which one could be sure that a machine thinks is to be the machine and feel oneself thinking. And I was like, oh, that's quite a diss, Turing. And he just kind of wipes this one away. And I'm like, well, I don't know. He says, we don't have to solve the mystery of consciousness before we can answer the question of this paper. Can a machine be constructed which can pass the test? And I'm still like kind of hung up on consciousness and meaning and intention. I don't feel like I could just dismiss those so easily.
Since we as humans feel that we have these things, there's sort of a primacy to these things.
Mm-hmm.
It's I think hard for us to accept that something that doesn't have them is doing the same thing that we're doing.
Primacy. Do you mean like consciousness first and then I have a thought? Something like that, kind of? This is getting very philosophical, my friend. We're gonna need our friend Matt Teichman on the show to help us unpack all of the mistakes we make in our fuzzy philosophies here.
I think I think human beings tend to think that our human consciousness is something special. That,
so it's like
this, I guess, is
chauvinism
probably
we have.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit of the theological argument too, that something has given us a divine spark that no machine could ever possess. But it is hard to, I think as humans, it's hard for us to accept that something which is purely mechanical could have intention and feelings and motivations and so forth.
Okay. All right. So Turing says we're going to leave that one aside. And I kind of a little hung up on it. He talks about disabilities as a critique, meaning like when you write a program, the program can't make a mistake in the same way a human can. Like if you encode some sort of math formula in the program, it's going to reliably calculate that the same way every time, but a human could make a mistake. It's kind of like asking, because they're procedural and mechanical, it's like saying, can a sewing machine make a mistake? But he raises this interesting point that I kind of liked, actually, from a software engineering standpoint, where he says that we're confusing two kinds of mistakes: error of function and error of conclusion. I started thinking, I listened to this podcast this week with Gergely Oroz. He's got a podcast called The Pragmatic Engineer, and he interviewed Armin Ronacher on it. Armin Ronacher was the first engineer at Century, and they do like this massive error reporting service. You can pay them, have the errors from all your services, front end, back end, whatever, go to them. And I started thinking about like type systems, right? People say, oh, type systems are going to prevent me from making mistakes, but those are probably, and then other people like Lamport are like, well, but it won't prevent you from dividing by zero unless you use one of these crazy type systems and you do a huge amount of work. So I like this distinction Turing made between error of conclusion. Like I wrote the program to do the wrong thing, and error of function. Oh, it just screwed up doing the thing. And this was connected to this podcast interview because Oroz asked Armin Ronacher, he was like, do you see different error rates for different language stacks? And he said, yeah, we get huge numbers of errors in JavaScript. It like vastly outstrips the volume of errors in every other language. But most of them are ignorable. They're not meaningful. It's like it's just spew out errors. And he said if you compare this to like their customers who are writing in C++, they're writing these game engines, very, very few errors, but catastrophic errors in those cases. And he said that a lot when they noticed when people switched to TypeScript in a lot of front-end JavaScript projects, you would think that the strict typing in TypeScript, and TypeScript's a cool language with a great type system. He was like, and Armin Ronacher was like, yeah, it's a good language. He was like, yeah, you would expect that the volume of errors would go down if the language made a difference, but it didn't. These front-end apps in TypeScript are still spewing out massive amounts of errors. It's just reminded me of the static typing versus dynamic typing argument, this error of function versus error of conclusion. Maybe this is my own weird little rabbit hole, and I'm driving us off a cliff here, Mike.
Like a Thelma and Louise sort of situation.
Yeah, I didn't ask you if you wanted to be driven off the cliff, though. We're not holding hands.
Yeah, I don't have a really good response to this argument. I feel like he's just sort of trying to cover his bases and make the argument that computers don't naturally behave like human beings. And
so it connects to the next objection, the Ada Lovelace one. This is the one that he seems most compelled by. I inferred from the way he treats this objection that he kind of actually has respect for it. He phrases it as, and I don't know what Ada Lovelace really wrote, but his paraphrasing is, a computer can't do anything new. You write a program, the computer executes that program. It's not going to spontaneously, creatively, originally do stuff. And maybe the LLM, I don't know, is a funny example, a counterexample there. But then Turing says in response to this, how do we know that humans are truly doing something new? It's like, oh, geez, punch in the gut right there, Alan Turing. You're saying that we just are like programs, reliably reproducing our program every day for thousands of years? I don't know.
It
That's a tough pill to swallow, my friend.
it's particularly tough from Turing, who, multiple times in his life had these incredibly out of the box, innovative ideas. So if he's just, revealing things that were already there, then the rest of us are just sort of chimpanzees, I guess.
Yeah, it's like he's just one cog in the Turing machine, and it just the right head happened to land on his spot in the right orientation, and boom, the problem paper comes out. Oh, this is just like it's a little too fatalistic. It's kind of too cynical for me, Mike.
It is an interesting question, though, and I think it goes back a little bit to what he was talking about. He details a bit in this paper, and I won't go into it, but he talks about how basically all programs boil down to state machines,
Mm-hmm.
and so you have to ask the question: can a state machine be complex enough, sophisticated enough to eventually do something that looks like thought?
Mm-hmm.
And potentially by doing something that looks like thought, potentially come up with something that seems novel or innovative or something that you didn't expect it to do.
Mm-hmm.
We sort of think maybe that's possible now because we've seen computer programs do it
Yeah.
or seem to do it. But at
Mm-hmm.
the time, it was probably a pretty good objection to his question of whether or not machines could think.
Hmm. The last one is the informality. He says the informality objections. He says we can't. People will object that we can't produce a program which would determine what a human would do in all scenarios because humans just are adaptable, right? They can't. Thus, you could extend that to say, well, humans must not be machines. You can't produce a program that would reliably model human behavior. And I think this objection is to me where he gets closest to talking about agency, autonomy, independence, and those are the key attributes. It seems like you need for when people say they want to produce AGI. Well, AGI to me seems like it's got autonomy, it's got agency, it's got independence. If there is a program for humans, it ultimately relates to this like free will question. Are we programmed by our biology? Are we compelled to act in specific ways in all situations? To win at the imitation game, though, do you need agency? And I think it's pretty obvious that you could say no. Like to have a program that successfully deceives, it doesn't need that. It doesn't need to intend anything. And I think that's what's most striking to me about the idea of this paper, the central idea of this paper. It's like ultimately what he's saying is you're not going to be able to inhabit the quote unquote mind of the program, so you have to parse its behavior based on what you see. And at some point, there will be programs and computers where people just naturally say, yeah, they're thinking. They they're so good at deceiving us, lulling us into believing that they're thinking, that we just sort of imbue them with that trait. Yeah, that's thought. And that linguistic move is what he's predicting is going to come to pass. And he's saying it's more interesting than asking if they're thinking at all.
So here's a potentially silly question. In that paper by the UCSD researchers, we mentioned already that they had to give the LLMs a fairly sophisticated prompt or context to make them behave in a way that would fool people.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had discussions amongst ourselves and with our friends about how a lot of times getting the LLMs to give you answers in the way you want is a little bit of an art that has to do with asking the question in the right way.
Mm-hmm.
So my sort of silly question is, by providing the AIs with a sort of detailed context of how we want it to behave and how we want it to uh, treat the question, are we sort of endowing it with intention?
I don't think so. I think that goes to Searle's Chinese room. You want to talk about the Chinese room? Can we talk about the Chinese room a couple times on this? So this paper is in the chronology of attempts to pass the Turing test. So hopefully we've done a good enough job describing what the Turing test is. And there's a little bit of a short chronology here. You mentioned ELIZA. That was 1966. And ELIZA fooled some people, but I would guess that the sum is a small number. And then you've got Watson, IBM Watson, on Jeopardy in 2011. In 2014, there was this chatbot named Eugene Gustman who claimed to be a 13-year-old Ukrainian child. And it was a claim to have passed the Turing test by it fooled 33% of human judges into believing it was a 13-year-old Ukrainian boy. It was put together by the University of Reading. And originally, people were like, wow, it passed the Turing test. And then shortly after, people were like, what? I don't know. That's kind of lame. So it was like really questioned about it. But then in 2024, this last year, this paper comes out, Large Language Models Pass the Turing Test by Cameron Jones, Benjamin Bergen from the Cognitive Science Department at UCSD. And they say when prompted to adopt a human-like persona, GPT 4.5 was judged to be human 73% of the time, significantly more often than the interrogators selected the real human participant. So your question is, they gave it a prompt. Is that intention? I feel like the answer has to be absolutely not.
I'm less convinced of that, I guess, but I guess I also don't know exactly what the formal definition of intention is.
But you could, if you suppose that giving it a prompt is imbuing it with intention, you say the same with every computer program I write. I write a program, I deploy the program runs with intention. Independently from me? No, it's just programmatic crap that I said, please run this, and please don't fail very much, and please don't cost too much when I put it in the cloud. There's no intention in there. It's the same, I think. Here's what I think, though. I would be surprised if, so Jones and Bergen, they run their study. I'd be surprised if you took the same group of participants and gave them this, like you had them run that study with the same humans year after year. I'd be surprised if the numbers didn't precipitously decline after that first year. So it's like, yeah, the first year people are convinced this is a human, but successive attempts to pass the Turing test again, I don't think are going to work with an LLM, because you get really good at identifying their structure, right? Like it becomes pretty obvious you're talking to an LLM after you've talked to them enough. Am I crazy on that one?
Well, my personal experiences and experiments have convinced me that you're correct there, because like I said, I tried over and over again to sort of get Gemini and ChatGPT and other things to, talk to me about Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. And I tried several approaches. I clearly did not do it in a sophisticated enough way, but they inevitably want to sound like they're lecturing.
Yeah.
So it just does not sound conversational. You can't, I could not get them to sound conversational. And so I'm curious what maybe in this paper, the scope of what they're trying to determine is narrow enough that they don't have to worry about the because I think it's limited to 5 minutes, they said, right? So I think the test that they did in this research paper, they limited each interrogator to 5 minutes talking to what they call the witness. So you couldn't you probably were just focused on trying to figure out which is which, and you didn't just sort of randomly get into conversation about, the weather that day or where they're from or, what motivated them to get into their line of work, things like that would probably be difficult for a bot to answer sincerely.
I have one easy question. Is it an LLM or not? This is the question. Hey, I want to make a list. Should I use emojis or not? Emoji bulleted list is the absolute LLM tell right there. They just love those things to pieces.
You kind of have to instruct them now not to give you markdown.
Oh
So
yeah, it's like, please stop giving me lists. Please make shorter answers. Anyway, I'm sorry. So I actually think that the the Chinese room. It's hard not to look at the Turing test, the imitation game paper, and not think of Searle's Chinese room. I didn't realize the paper he wrote, Minds, Brains, and Programs. I didn't realize that it was meant to be an explicit response to Turing's paper. But he talks about, so John Searle, he wrote this paper in 1980. He's talking about intentionality. He's saying brains have intentionality. And he says starting a program is not the same as endowing it with intentionality. And then he came up with this distinction, which was people sometimes talk about it still, but for a long time you would hear this. Searle says that is, if you say that the program has intentionality, then that's what he calls strong AI. And he's like, I don't think that's going to happen. Instead, you're going to have this weak AI thing where it can like convincingly kind of represent language. But then he gives this analogy to the Chinese room. He said, in the Chinese room, just to restate it, you put, Cyril picks Chinese because he's like, I don't know what, I can't identify Chinese. So he's in a room and there's like 3 different chunks of Chinese text. There's the input that comes in, there's the output Chinese, and then there's like a translator. So like you could imagine that the input tells you which output to translate to. And he says, if I'm just mechanically doing that middle step where I translate input to output, there's no intentionality in the room. There's no, he uses the word cognitive states. And so the program, it doesn't have cognitive states. It doesn't have a mind. That's his argument. I don't know. I've never been hugely convinced by the Searle argument because, like you said, I don't know how to define intentionality. I don't, and he doesn't seem to do this massively great job at defining what intentionality is and defining cognitive states. He's just saying it's not about whether people have cognitive states, but we attribute cognitive states to other people when we talk to them. We speak to people imagining they're not just mechanically turning my input formulaically into output. Their own mind is progressing through cognitive states.
So another sort of silly question. If I think about human intention, there seem to be sort of 2 basic types of human intention. One is to survive. So I don't want to be cold. I don't want to be hungry. I don't want to be, eaten by an animal.
This is like biological programming, kind of sounds like.
Yeah. So, and my suspicion is that, or my belief, I guess, is that computer programs do not yet have that sort of motivation. There's nothing.
Fortunately, we can still unplug them.
I'm concerned that somebody will give them that in the future, but when they are doing what they are doing, there's not something in the back of their mind about, I have to make sure that my power supply keeps functioning. But then there are other things that you can at least give a computer program an objective, which is sort of another sort of thing that humans have. Once you've gotten past the food, clothing, shelter thing, then you can start thinking about things that you want to achieve in your life that are beyond that. And those are objectives that you get either because of your own desires or things your parents have given you or inspired you to do or whatever. And so I guess the silly question I'm trying to get to is there something about us being entities in the physical world that gives us a different type of intention than what we could possibly give to computer programs?
I think it sounds like the kinds of conversations that have happened for probably hundreds of years. Does a bee have intentionality and agency, right? Like it has things, it has optimization problems it's working on. It's foraging for nectar. It's part of a hive. It looks very programmatic maybe. But I was at a pool the other day, earlier this summer. I got stung on the back of the neck by the bee. Did the bee intend to sting me? I would project, yeah, it intended to sting me. It wasn't like just, hey, programmatically, let's seek out that guy with that dark hair in the pool and make sure he gets stung today as part of the program of the beehive. Is it possible for the bee to sting without intention? I mean, maybe I'm going way out in space here. Or you think of like a virus, right? Like a virus, looks more like a program and not an animal. But scientists seem to talk about viruses almost having intention, having agency, having kind of like a will, like it intentionally propagates itself. But is that a program encoded in there? Maybe we're getting too far afield for the Turing test here. I think it's provocative that Turing says, I don't care about whether machines can think or not. What I care about is if you could write a program on a sufficiently powerful computer that we can imagine in the future that could deceive people. And it's also interesting that you and I could sit here, and most people around the world could sit here and be like, oh yeah, that totally has happened. What does that mean?
I think it's probably arguable also that a lot of the LLM or AI benchmarks that exist now are maybe in some respects even more rigorous than the Turing test.
Hmm.
There are, they can do high level math, and they can analyze legal documents, and they can write contracts. And maybe the Turing test really isn't all that special as a measure of cognitive ability.
That's my question for you. Is it relevant, the Turing test? Is it relevant for us?
I think it's mostly interesting because if you can simply say, yes, we've achieved, we've passed the Turing test, we've achieved what Alan Turing thought was necessary to show that machines think, then we can sort of say, okay, that's done. What's a more compelling test of AGI or
Hmm.
something like that? But
Well, yeah. And if the Turing test is about substitution, like can you substitute the program for a computer? Well, cool. I can just not hire humans anymore for that task where they're substitutable, where the computer deceives well enough. The Searle paper, he was responding to this guy, Roger Schenk's research. And Schenk had this like fact-based system in the 70s, and you would feed it a story like a man goes into a restaurant and he orders a hamburger and he pays and he leaves a big tip and he says, this has been the best experience, and he leaves. And then you ask the computer, did the man eat the hamburger? And can it successfully answer the question? Well, we don't need to hire anyone anymore to answer the question about whether the man ate the hamburgers. We can just automate that. We just feed that question to the LM all day long. So it is substitutable for this particular human task.
I think there's a business in that.
Oh yeah,
Hamburger
yeah.
monitors.
Did the man eat the hamburger? You got the cameras. See the people go in. See the people come out. Yeah, I'm sure it's a startup waiting to happen, Mike. Here's my doubt about the Turing test. As I was reading it, I thought, I have been in countries where I don't speak the language. And I have noticed this phenomenon in myself and in people who are native speakers of that in that country. We are like so hardwired, so eager to cross the chasm of communication that we'll jump through crazy hoops to do it. That we'll just sort of use hand gestures and facial expressions. And people are so kind when you're traveling and they're trying to tell you how to get to the bathroom. You don't speak their language. It's like there is an extreme, incredible drive inside people to communicate. And so the doubt I have about the Turing test is we're so like, is it interesting that a program can imitate conversationalists because we're so willing and eager to talk to something or anything? The AI boyfriend, AI girlfriend is an example. Like, I'm so eager to communicate as soon as a program is just building a tiny, crummy little bridge over to me. I'm just going to finish that bridge right off just so I could keep talking because that's my innate thing. I think that's a little bit of a challenge for the Turing test. Yeah, it's language based, but it's language based on a thing that we have extreme eagerness to satisfy crossing the communication gap. So we participate in our own deception, in other words. We're totally happy to be deceived.
So I came across this thing. Well, I was listening to a podcast, and the mathematician being interviewed he's been using AI to help him with his research work, and they came up with this thing that they call the Birch test.
Birch test.
And it was, I guess, originally published in a Nature paper in 2023. which is unfortunately behind a paywall. The criteria of the test, I think, are the first one is the result has to be entirely generated by the AI. So it's not just something where you're using the AI as humans using it as an assistant.
Like spontaneously generated?
Yeah, like you give it, you have an AI and you give it some general idea of what you want it to work on, and then it comes up with some result entirely on its own without any back and forth with a human. And then there's another criterion is that it be non-trivial. But one thing that I thought was kind of interesting is that I guess it's the second criterion in their list, but the most interesting one to me is the results have to be interpretable. So the idea being that it's not like it's kind of like what you might call the 42 answer in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Answer the world, meaning of everything. Yeah, universe. Yeah.
If the AI comes back and says, "Yes, I can solve the Riemann hypothesis," and it turns out that it's true, but it doesn't show its work, then it's not really a useful thing. So anyway,
I don't think LLMs are really passing that test, Mike. I'm trying to be like, can you write a test for this Python function? And it blows.
The Nature paper, I believe, also concluded that no AI has yet passed the Birch test. But I just thought it was interesting that part of their test was that it has to be interpretable to a human. And so I think the point I'm getting at here is that the Turing test, I think, is basically a way for human beings to try to decide if the computers are intelligent. But maybe ultimately the computers don't care if we think they're intelligent.
I think I imagine reading the the Imitation Game paper in 1950 when it came out, or even in between 1950 and 1960, and being like, this guy's on drugs. There's no way you're going to take one of these big vacuum tube machines and you're going to have it spitting out answers that people will interpret as coming from a human. That's just, I don't think so. Maybe by the 80s and 90s, I could start to believe it. Certainly now I can believe it. So there is a visionary quality to this paper, which is what makes it fun to read. It's also hard not to let your mind spin off in all these directions about the intentionality and agency and do we need to think about cognitive states? I mean, like Searle's response to the paper is kind of off topic because Turing's explicitly saying, don't care about that. And Searle's like, well, what about this thing that you say you don't care about? Well, what about it? Well, I enjoyed reading it. Thanks for bringing it to me. This has been Picture Me Coding with Eric Gaker and Mike Mull. If you'd like to reach us, you could send us an email, podcast@picturemecoding.com. We are on Blue Sky under Picture Me Coding, and we do have a Patreon. For $4 a month, you could support the show if you like what we're doing, also at Picture Me Coding. Thanks so much for listening. This has been Picture Me Coding with Eric Gaker and Mike Mull. We'll see you again in a couple weeks.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.